All right, pool folks, I want to put you on to something. So, I live here in Western North Carolina, and I'm getting ready to open my pool for my parents like I do every year. A few years ago, I found this forum, Trouble Free Pools. Go there and just read, especially this pool school stuff. If you are anything like our pool was up until a few years ago, I can tell you that we used to do everything by the book as far as pool store goes. So we would take water to the pool store, they would tell us what we would need, we would add that stuff to it, and then invariably by the end of the year we would end up with this algae outbreak that would just take us forever to kind of knock down. And it was almost clockwork. It would happen every single year. Um, and so what I did is I started reading in this forum, and especially if you start to read about stabilizer, probably in this ABCs of pool chemistry, if you start reading about stabilizer, which is really this cyanuric acid, what you're going to find is that you need to be adjusting your chlorine levels based on what your stabilizer is. And that was game changing for me. Once I figured that out, then taking care of my parents' swimming pool after that was just insanely easy. So again, I cannot advise going to this forum enough. Um, the other thing, once you read up and you kind of understand chlorine and especially CYA or the stabilizer, the other thing you can do is go to this pool math. It is a so it's an app, and I've got it over here. This is my phone that's being projected over here on the left. And so if you go here and download it, and I think it's, I don't know, $7 or $8 for the year if you want the whole thing. What you're going to see is, let me go back. Whoops. Pool math. It's going to look something like this, right? And so this is for my parents' pool. And so this has got just an insane number of, calculations it can keep for you and everything else. So you can see here, I'm getting ready to open up the pool. So notice that this is all like 11 month. Um, Although what I've done is once you start to use this for a while, you kind of know what your numbers should be. So I stopped storing mine. That's why you can see that the last stored here was 11 months, because once I get it in range, I don't have to worry about it much anymore. But um, things I like about this is it will store all this stuff. The other thing I can do for mom's pool is I can look at the effects of adding. So my mom's pool is about a 33,000 gallon pool. And so I can say, well, what's going to happen if I add calcium hypochlorate that is 73%, and let's say I add 1 pound of it. Right, well, I can see here it's going to raise my free chlorine by 2.6. If I have a salt pool, it's going to raise salt by 2.7. It'll tell you all that. Well, what if I'm not using Cal Hypo? What if I'm using something else like bleach? Right, and this really was the game changer for me. So if I'm using bleach and I'm using 1 gallon, well, notice my free chlorine now goes up. So for 1 gallon, it gives me 3 parts per million free chlorine. And so then you can start to kind of figure what cost would be. So for me, even though it's a little more bulky, it's cheaper by part per million to just go get the bleach, the 10% chlorine that's in the pool aisle at Walmart, rather than buy the hypochlorate. The other thing that I steer away from, and the thing that got me in trouble, and the reason that I say go into this pool school and read it, and especially the ABCs. Why I think it's so important to understand what this stabilizer is doing. So sometimes the real reason I got into this is because a couple of years ago, 3 years ago maybe, I opened my parents' pool, and dumped some chlorine in it like I've done every other year, and it kind of foamed up, fizzed up a little bit. I got this real strong chlorine kind of odor. And then that was that. And I tested for chlorine and got nothing. Dumped a bunch more chlorine in it, tested for chlorine, got nothing. Um, could not figure out what was going on. At that time, I was still going to the pool store. I went to the pool store. They tested my water and said, "You've got chlorine lock." I had no idea what that meant at that time. Now I think I do know what that means. Um, I think I probably had some ammonia built up in the pool from bacterial activity. And if you've ever had the unfortunate event of mixing chlorine and ammonia together, you kind of know what you get there. But essentially what I had to do at that point was just keep adding chlorine until I got out of the lock, which I kind of hate to use that term now, but that's kind of what people at the pool store say. And then what I started controlling after that, because I do think that my stabilizer got up so high that that's what caused the problem. So now what I really watch is my stabilizer. I really try to keep it in these levels and not much more than that. And then the thing that the pool app does is it'll tell you what your free chlorine should be based on your stabilizer levels, right? So so for instance, let's say I tested Mom's pool, right? So let me go to, I forgot where that is. Oh, it's right there. Whoops. Log test results. Actually, let me close that out and show you. Right. So notice right now that I'm saying my CYA is 50. Right. And so if I want to log a test result, and let's say also just so we're clear, 50, and then my target range is 30 to 60. But also notice that it's suggesting that my free chlorine be 4 to 8 parts per million. Well, let's say that I go in and I test my stabilizer again. And let's say my stabilizer, for whatever reason, went up to 90. And I'll store that. Right? So now my stabilizer went up to 90. It's telling me I'm out of range there because it's supposed to be 30 to 60. But also notice how it adjusted my chlorine there. So now it's telling me that my chlorine needs to be 7 to 12 parts per million. And so then I can use my test kits in order to adjust for that. The relationship between stabilizer and free chlorine, I don't think most people follow that. Since I've started following this, it's been, I guess, 3 or 4 years now, I've had 0 issues with algae at all, none, period. And so I just cannot emphasize this enough to follow this app, jump in this forum, read up about. The other thing you can do, obviously, so if I go in and I log my test results, so let's say let's say my free chlorine now was, I don't remember what it was. Let's just say it's 2. Right. So I'll log that. And so you'll see it telling me that I'm out of range. If I click on this, again, so here it's telling me what my stabilizer is. It's telling me what my recommended range is based on my stabilizer. It's telling me what my target should be. So if I'm shooting for 10, and then it'll say, well, if you're using bleach and it's 10%, what size jugs are you using? And then it'll tell you how much you need to add in order to get to that. Let's say I'm not using bleach, right? Let's say I'm using, again, 73% Cal Hypo, right? Now you can see here, it's going to tell me that I'm going to need 3 pounds of that in this pool to bring myself up from a free chlorine of 2 to a free chlorine of 10. Right? So it's once you get used to using that, it is foolproof. You cannot beat it for what it does. It'll also tell you, so let's say you get an outbreak and your stabilizer levels are 90. If you read, again, in the forums, right? So reading the pool school, about what SLAM means, right? So shock level and maintain. So if I click that on, it's going to tell me that I need to get my SLAM or my free chlorine up to 35 parts per million, and I need to keep it there for probably 24 hours until the algae or whatever is out of the pool, right? So that's just another little trick that you can have. But honestly, I've never had to use that once I started this method. But again, I cannot emphasize enough. So again, let's say my stabilizer levels come back down. So now I'm back in the 40 range. So again, it tells me I need to be 3 to 7. If my target is 5 and I'm currently at a 2, then I only need to add about a pound of the 73% Cal Hypo. Unless you just need to, so you notice it's got some other things in here. So unless you just need to add stabilizer, personally, I would stay away from dichlor and I would stay away from trichlor. That's what got me in trouble the first time, because I went to the pool store. They said I needed to shock, and by what they mean by shock is I need to bring my chlorine levels way up. And so typically, when they give you they'll give you a shock sometimes, and they'll say, oh, you can just throw this straight in the pool. You don't need to mix it up. Typically, that's a trichlor or dichlor. You'll throw all that in there, and for every little bit that you're introducing, right? So I can show you this too. So if I go back to the effects of adding, I'll go to trichlor, and let's say I'm going to add 1 pound of trichlor. Well, notice what that's doing to my CYA levels or my stabilizer levels. It's causing them to go up by 2. That doesn't seem like much, but for every pound I'm throwing in, right, I'm increasing my stabilizer levels by 2. The only way to bring stabilizer levels down is to either drain water out of your pool or add a bunch of water into it. That's the only way that's going to change. If water is just evaporating from your pool, that CYA is not going anywhere. And so, honestly, if the water's evaporating, then your stabilizer levels are going up a little bit. So honestly, at that point, like, they gave me a 25-pound bucket, and they said dump it all in there, and that's what I did. And so that made my CYA levels go up to 50. I had been for years before using those chlorine tablets in order to maintain pH or maintain chlorine in the pool. The problem with those chlorine tablets is they are also stabilized chlorine, so it's also adding stabilizer for every single puck that you dissolve. So adding that 25 pounds in increased my stabilizer levels by 50. It's already sending me through the roof as far as stabilizer goes. It was going to be almost impossible for my chlorine to catch up and actually be effective there. Because if you have a chlorine level that high or a stabilizer level that high, right? So let's say, I don't know, let's say my stabilizer level at that point was, let's say it was 130. It was probably more than that. Right? So now my free chlorine needs to be up at around 14. If I just measured it at 2, then I'm easily adding 4 pounds of chlorine just to get it up to that level, and then continuing to add after that. And I don't know how well it's going to do at that level, and certainly you can get quite a bit higher than that, right? If you get up to 200 parts, right? So again, jump into trouble-free pools. Read through Pool School, understand the relationship between stabilizer and free chlorine levels, and then stop dumping all that crazy stuff in your pool. I don't really use anything else anymore except for liquid chlorine. I don't really use algicides. I don't use shocks. I don't use anything else. At the very beginning of the year, oftentimes what I'll do is I'll go buy some calcium hypochlorite. So again, just to show you that. So I will buy some Cal Hypo, and my pool store sells 73%. My pool store probably thinks I'm crazy because they see me about once or twice a year, right? So I'll come in and I'll buy this. I never know what name to call it because all the sellers have a different name for what it is. And so I'll go in the pool store and say, hey, I need some Cal Hypo, and they look at me like I'm crazy, and they start grabbing bags, and I'm like, no, I don't need that. I need the 25-pound bag of, oh, you need the shock? No, I don't need the shock. Just let me see the active ingredient, and I'll tell you what it is. And so it ends up being whatever brand name it is, but I make sure the active ingredient is calcium hypochlorite. You can get this at Lowe's, you can get it at Walmart. You just have to be careful there because sometimes it'll be a lower percentage, right? So maybe 53% or maybe even 48%. But as long as it says Cal Hypo, then that's not stabilized chlorine. You're not continuing to add stabilizer into your pool. Stabilizer is kind of the enemy once it gets up so high. So again, I just can't emphasize enough. I hope this helps somebody. I hope it saves somebody some money. It certainly has saved us quite a bit of money over the years. Eventually, I would like to switch my parents' pool to a salt pool, but they're a little old school and not too much into that right yet. But I'm working on them, and we're going to get them there. But anyway, again, that's trouble-free pools. The app is called Pool Math. I cannot, like, they're not paying me for this, but I cannot recommend it enough. It's just unbelievable what it'll do. Y'all take care.